I'm Tom. I'm from the Research Communications team at the University of Cambridge, and I'm joined by David Woodman, who's Professor of History at Robinson College, and we're going to talk about England's first king, Athelstan, grandson of the much more famous Alfred the Great. So David, first question, why don't people know about Athelstan?
Very good question. It's a real shame that people don't know about Athelstan. I think one big reason why is that he didn't have a contemporary biographer. So there was nobody at his royal court writing about his achievements, writing about the things that he was doing. If we think about Alfred, his grandfather, who you just mentioned, he did have a biographer. He had a Welsh cleric, someone called Asa, who was writing all about his life and times, the Viking raids, everything that was going on in Wessex, everything that Alfred had to do. And poor old Athelstan, he simply doesn't have that. And in fact, the main contemporary source, one of the major contemporary sources for the whole period, known as the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, starts in the reign of King Alfred and goes all the way through to 1066 and beyond, actually falls relatively quiet for Athelstan's reign, apart from a wonderful poem in 937. So actually, he falls away from view. It's quite difficult to know about him in terms of narrative texts, and I think that's one major reason why Athelstan we don't know as much, or at least he hasn't survived in the popular consciousness as much.
So do you see this as a great injustice of English history?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I first found out about Athelstan actually when I became an undergraduate here in Cambridge. It was one of the very first questions I was set. If you were to write a biography of Athelstan, what would its main themes be? And I remember being astonished that, I'd grown up through the UK schooling system. I didn't know about him. I didn't know that this was the person who'd formed England in the first place. So it became apparent to me that he was someone who was, he deserved much more attention in the long run. And I really hope that he gets it with these anniversaries coming up.
So you've just written a book about Athelstan. This is a long time ago. Records get thinner and thinner as you go further back in time. So what do you know, what can we know about Athelstan?
Yeah, very, very good question. So one thing to say is, so I guess that the basic parameters of his reign are that he becomes king in 924, he's crowned in early September 925, he creates England only a couple of years later in 927, and he reigns all the way through to 939 with many challenges to his position. So we know the basic parameters. We can get a sense of his royal policy, the kind of royal action that he was undertaking, from things like, we have an amazing set of contemporary royal diplomas, so legal documents that are talking about the grants of land that he's making. They also give us insights into contemporary politics in various ways from the people who are listed at the end. We know about his laws, so we have 6 or so surviving law codes which tell us about the legal steps that he's taking, the way in which he's trying to enforce his kingship across England. So from those things we can reconstruct a great deal about his royal action. But if we're thinking about the basics of, what did he look like, what kind of person was he, it's very, very difficult to know, and we just don't have contemporary accounts that tell us about that.
So, do we have any images of him at all? Is there any way of trying to imagine what this guy was like?
Yeah, actually, we do, and here in Cambridge, we're very lucky. In the Parker Library in Corpus Christi College, we have what is the earliest surviving manuscript portrait of any king from England, and there is Athelstan, and he's depicted in a very sort of reverential way. He's got his head bowed. He's looking at a precious manuscript, and he seems to be offering this manuscript, or at least consulting it in front of St. Cuthbert. And we think that this manuscript was given to St. Cuthbert's community in 934 as he was going north, journeying north actually towards war in Scotland at that point. We think he brought this with him and he gave it to the community as a way of getting them on side with his cause and with his kingship.
So where's he living growing up? What's his family setup? So he's got this cool granddad, Alfred the Great, which is pretty amazing and imposing. That's a lot to live up to. Yeah. Tell us a bit, where was he based? What was he doing in his younger part of his life?
Yeah, well, the first bit of his life, I think, was very difficult involved in various ways. So, as you say, he was the grandson of Alfred the Great, so he's very much part of the royal house of Wessex. But at a certain point in his early childhood, he's sent to Mercia, and we think he's brought up in the court of his aunt, Athelflad, the lady of the Mercians, and her husband, Ethelred, the lord of the Mercians. So brought up away from the heart of politics that's happening in Wessex. And actually there was a degree of opposition to his rule when he first becomes king in 924. We see that there are various people in Winchester, in Wessex, who are plotting against him. There's a man called Alfred who's supposed to have plotted to have him blinded and thus neutralised as a king. So he actually, when he first becomes king, he has to overcome a huge amount of challenge in trying to establish himself.
So very handily, we've got some playing cards here, some kind of retro playing cards, showing the kings and queens of England, and we've spread out just the ones from Anglo-Saxon period. We've got some Viking kings as well here, and you can kind of see they're all portrayed in slightly different ways. So we've got some looking like pretty hardcore warrior types, Harold II, some sort of more pious looking depictions, some pretty kingly, some carrying their treasure. And here we have Athelstan, who has been given a 6 in this pack of cards. And he looks a bit of a foot soldier. Going back 1,100 years, how do you think people would have seen him? Would this have been familiar? How would he react if he could see this depiction of him?
Well, it's really interesting to see him as a 6 and Alfred there as an ace. I mean, I think he's obviously being depicted in militaristic terms there. He's as you say, Tom, he's a soldier, and definitely people would have seen him in that light. I mean, he was a warring king. He was somebody who had to be very, very powerful militarily. We know that he went to war at various points. 934, he went to Scotland on a military campaign. 937, he had to defeat a major coalition of Vikings, Scottish and Strathclyde kings who rose up against him and tried to overthrow him at the famous Battle of Brunanburh. And later, probably in 939, we think that he sent a fleet to Europe to intervene on the European stage as well. So definitely he was a militaristic king. He was somebody who had great martial skill. But it's a very sort of narrow image of him. And there's so much more to Athelstan in terms of, I mean, he was a major sponsor of learning, education. It was in his court that he encouraged European scholars from across Europe to go there and talk about the texts that they were working on, exchange ideas. We think it's in Athelstan's court that one of the earliest encounters in England with chess unfolds. So really, really interesting things are taking place. I mean, I also think of him as a sort of innovator. He's someone who's innovating in terms of government and governance, in terms of learning. So yes, that's giving one side, and it's definitely an accurate depiction of Athelstan. But there are many more as well, of course.
So maybe he needs to have a book or some vellum tucked under his arm.
Definitely.
Would be.
Yeah, thinking back to that wonderful manuscript portrait we were talking about in Corpus, I would definitely incorporate an element of that as well, I think.
We've spoken about Athelstan being the first king of England, but I'm really struggling to visualise what kind of place we're talking about here. What was England at that time?
Politically, England had been divided for many generations. So you have to think about it in terms of basically a hodgepodge of independent kingdoms, places like Mercia, Wessex, Northumbria, East Anglia, Strathclyde and Cumbria. So a really difficult mix of different peoples, all of whom had their own sequence of rulers, kings, who could issue laws, charters, coins in their own name. So Athelstan is trying to bring all of these people together in his creation of England for the first time in 927. And there's no way that it could have happened overnight in the way that the documents from his reign suggest. So, he's very quickly titled Rex Anglorum, King of the English, and even sometimes Rex Totis Britanniae in Latin, so King of all Britain. So he's making very elaborate claims to areas of Britain too. But of course, what that meant to those people in different parts of England is a different story. To what extent they recognised him as king, it's really difficult to know. And you can imagine that at the limits, in places like Cornwall or in York for generations by this point has been ruled by Vikings. There's a whole sequence of Viking rulers there. Whether they would recognise Athelstan as king is a good question. It's out for debate. And again, this is where the military aspect of his rule is really important. He would have had to enforce his power there periodically. So it's very, very complex. Is an answer to that.
So England was super diverse. We talk about diversity in England and Britain today, but this is a super diverse place. I mean, in terms of, could they even understand each other? If you're living in Cornwall or in modern day Liverpool, would you be able to understand each other?
Yeah, well, that's another part of this, that different languages would have been spoken. In Athelstan's reign, we have these documents. We have two contemporary surviving documents from his reign where he lists all of the people that were brought together in his royal assemblies. And it's probable they were speaking Old English, Old Norse, Old Welsh, Old Irish, a whole range of different languages. So how they would have understood each other is a good question. And so differences, we've got to be thinking about differences of language, differences of culture, differences of religious belief. So lots and lots of diversity. And Athelstan is trying to, bring them all together as one, as part of his assembly.
And so you mentioned the Scots, so what we would now call Scots. So how does he deal with these sort of outer reaches? Who do they have their own rulers? Do they in what we now call Scotland and Wales?
They do, yes. And Wales itself is very fragmented into a number of kingdoms at this point. Likewise, Scotland is divided in various ways. We're getting the emergence of a place called Alba at this point. And Athelstan does lay claim to rule over these parts. He says, "I'm the king of all Britain." Now we're getting the perspective from Athelstan's perspective, from his point of view. That's what he's trying to spin at his court. That's the kind of story that he's telling. We don't always quite get the view from Wales or from Scotland. How was he received by those kings of Britain? We see him summoning these Welsh kings and summoning some of the Scottish kings to his court at various different moments. So he clearly had some kind of power over them. But again, the extent to which he's actually able to exert himself in Wales or in Scotland is a moot question, I think, and difficult to judge. Certainly, he built up. People resented him. I think that's very clear. So from Wales in the 10th century, and there's this amazing poem that survives called Armus Brunanburh, the great prophecy of Britain, and it calls in the most bloodthirsty terms for the Welsh to rise up and kill the English and expel them from the island. So it's a bit difficult to date. We're not totally sure whether it's Athelstan's reign or not, but I think there's a good case can be made for it to be in Athelstan's time. And if it is, it just shows you exactly the kind of reception that he was receiving there.
And so how do you know that Athelstan was bringing these rulers from what we now call Wales and Scotland to him? Where's the evidence?
So the evidence is in these documents called royal diplomas. So royal diplomas, basically speaking, they're a legal text in which the king is granting a bit of land to an individual or to an institution like a church, and it sets out the sort of the Latin and the Old English, the bounds of the estate, and the sort of preamble to it all, the main text. But then at the bottom there's a list of hundreds of names in the case of Athelstan's. Well, not quite. Sorry, hundreds of people would have been there, but 70 plus names in these huge witness lists, and they're laid out hierarchically so you can get a sense of who's doing very well in their career at different points, who's afforded what status at the Royal Assembly. So these Welsh and Scottish kings appear in those royal diplomas of Athelstan listed at the end, and there we can see them present, being summoned to his court.
So all of Athelstan's dreams have come true. He's king of England, but was this a tough gig, David?
It's putting it mildly. I mean, hugely difficult, I think, for him. Having achieved the kingship in the first place against a background of hostility from Winchester, he had to hold on to it. That was his number one job. And then, of course, he expands very quickly. So he goes from being king of the Anglo-Saxons in 924, 925, then 927 he becomes king of England. So he's got to hold on to his gains. And it's by no means clear that he's going to be able to achieve that, particularly in Northumbria. I think that's really a key to his kingship. So he expands in 927 on the death of the Viking king, the then Viking king in York, a man called Sitrich. And he incorporates York and Northumbria within his control. And then the key is, as I say, to hold on to it, to incorporate. And York and Northumbria, they would have had many Scandinavian settlers there, people who were not naturally orientated towards Athelstan, seeing Athelstan as their king. So that would have been very, very difficult. And York had actually, many of the Viking kings who were based in York had formed a link with the Viking stronghold in Dublin. So there were Vikings traversing from Dublin to York all of the time. So there was always the risk that Viking raids, Viking parties, Viking fleets could link up in Northumbria and cause Athelstan a big problem on his northern border. And this came to happen in 937. So we have this the sort of pivotal battle of his reign, where Olaf Guthfrithson, a Viking from Dublin, tries to take over, tries to raise up a force against Athelstan. So he brings on board Constantine, king of the Scots, and a king of Strathclyde and Cumbria as well, we think, and rises up and tries to fight Athelstan. And I mentioned that the chronicle is noticeably laconic for Athelstan's reign, but for this particular entry, it inserts this wonderful poem, the famous poem of the Battle of Brunanburh, which talks about how events unfolded, the way in which Athelstan and his brother Edmund managed to defend the English kingdom against this Viking coalition. So it's a key moment, and I think Athelstan's New England was very much on the line that day in 937.
So as battle victories go on the CVs of kings, this is a big deal. I mean, what would you compare this to in sort of world history as a win?
It's a huge deal. I mean, it's so important in contemporary terms that chronicles across Ireland, Wales, Scandinavia, they all register it. So not just the outcome, but also it seems to have been a very blood-filled occasion. Many people were slaughtered. The poem talks about bodies being left as food for scavenger birds on the fields after the occasion. So it was really very important. A near contemporary chronicler from England as well also talks about the fact that it was so important that had it failed, England wouldn't have survived in the same way. So really vital, I think.
So where does this pivotal battle take place? It's a long time ago. Does everyone agree where it happened?
The complete opposite. There's been a huge amount of debate about exactly where Brunanburh took place. Brunanburh is the original Old English place name, and people have made all sorts of suggestions about where Brunanburh could be. Traditionally, it's thought to be in the northwest, on the Wirral. People think it's likely to be a place called Bromborough, which is on the Wirral today. Personally, I think that's my favourite interpretation as well. If you can imagine a coalition of Vikings coming across from Dublin, linking up with Scottish kings. The poem talks about Athelstan and Edmund having to leave Wessex to go and fight this battle. That's the most likely location for me. Other suggestions have been that it could have been also in Northumbria, but on the east coast. And I think that's a bit less likely that you would imagine a Viking sailing around the north of the UK and coming down the east.
Many people making pilgrimages to this battle site?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, there's archaeological work is going on in the Wirral all the time, and lots of important artefacts are found up and down the northwest coast, which speaks to its long history, very interesting history into the Irish Sea Zone and into Ireland as well.
So I was going to ask you as well, so we've spoken a bit about the sort of military challenges that he's facing. What about ordinary people and how they're interacting with, what kind of legal system is there at the time in terms of currency, what's going on? Did Athelstan have any work to do on that front?
Yeah, he did a lot of work, both in terms of his laws and in terms of his systems of coinage and money as well. Absolutely. So actually, for Athelstan's reign, just by chance, we happen to have quite a large number, relatively speaking, of his law codes that have survived. We can see a king who's really concerned about issues like theft in particular. He keeps legislating about theft. You get a sense that he's trying to do something, he and his royal advisors are trying to combat the issue of theft. It doesn't work, and then they try again. So it's amazing. His law codes are amazing for showing the sort of toing and froing from the centre of government to the localities. How's it working? Some of the legal materials actually reports back from places like Kent, where people are reporting saying, we've tried this, it's not working, so we're going to adjust it and tweak it and do this and that. So we get a real sense of a quite a sophisticated legal system, I think, in operation in Athelstan's reign, and mirrored in his money too. So at just the moment that he becomes King of England, his coinage takes on a new form. He's trying to issue coins across the entirety of the English kingdom. He interrupts the sequence of coins that have been Viking issues in York, crucially. So he's really, in terms of administrative functions, trying to knit together England as one, even if people are reluctant to recognise him in the north or in Cornwall.
And give us a sense, what's the punishment for a bit of light theft? A slap on the wrist and a small fine?
Well, the law codes for me really bring home what a different place it was from our modern world. I mean, I think, you know, the punishment for theft for someone over the age of 12 was execution. I mean, it was a very different place, a brutal society. So yes, I think we can be fortunate that we're not living in the 10th century.
So Athelstan rules for 15 years, I think. Other than not dying a horrible death in that period, did he achieve anything?
Oh yeah, I mean, a huge amount. Obviously, he forms England. That's the massive achievement for Athelstan. He encouraged learning and religiosity and really put in place strong foundations for kingship. And in fact, so effective and so powerful a ruler was he that he's one of the first people that we can see drawing up a sort of concerted foreign policy too. So he's linking into contemporary early 10th century Europe. His father, Edward the Elder, had been married 3 times, which meant that he had quite a large number of siblings, including a large number of half-sisters. And we can see that Athelstan is arranging a number of key diplomatic marriages between some of his half-sisters and different parts of Europe. And what's going on in Europe politically at this point in the early 10th century is very, very interesting as a point of contrast. So actually there's a lot of fragmentation happening politically in terms of kingdoms breaking down, different noble families rising up and trying to assert their own status as royal figures in their own right. And Athelstan is inserting himself and his family into those dynamics to make sure that he's well placed if he wants to take advantage and to show the levels of power that he had. So he marries his sisters into places like the royal house of West Francia, of East Francia. We think of Burgundy as well. So he's really very powerful on a European, well, he's very influential on a European stage too.
But what happened when Athelstan died, David?
Well, when Athelstan dies, things go backwards a bit in terms of England, at least. So Olaf Guthferthson, the very person that challenged him in 937 at Brunanburh, he comes back from Dublin, he comes to York, takes control there. So actually England in political terms fragments once more. And what happens from 939 all the way through till about 954, thereabouts, is that we have a very complex situation where various kings, various successors of Athelstan and Wessex are trying in various ways to bring back Northumbria into their authority and failing or achieving that at various different moments. And it's only from 954 onwards that we get a more solid England, if you like, in political terms. So it kind of breaks down basically when he dies.
Okay, so you're saying that Athelstan was the first king of England. The fact that his kingdom fragments after he dies, does that undermine in any way this idea that he's the first king of England?
Oh, for me, absolutely not. I mean, it's an extraordinary thing that he did in the first place. It's a sort of a political vision which is very, very important. And actually, I think he was so precociously ahead of his times that actually it would have been more surprising if it had held together once there were so many complications in terms of the Viking peoples in York and the different formerly independent kingdoms, all of whom he had to keep on board with this concept, this idea of the kingdom of the English. I mean, actually, if you think, if it had endured, it would have been, I think, more surprising, actually.
So we've already said, David, poor Athelstan didn't have a PR man in his own day, but we've done a pretty good job today you've done a pretty good job of highlighting his great achievements, but he can't have been all good. Was there anything a bit dodgy about him?
Yeah, I mean, yes, in some ways. I mean, it depends on. I guess it depends on your definition of dodgy, and actually, there's a lot of stuff that we, from a modern perspective, would find very difficult with a person like Athelstan, of course. One thing that near contemporary texts and later texts talk about is the death of one of his half brothers, a man called Edwin, who in 933 was cast out to sea in a ship, and he drowned as a result of being cast out of England. And contemporary texts don't really allude to Athelstan's role in this. They don't really talk about it. But by the early 12th century, when we get a whole outpouring of history in various ways, people like William of Malmesbury are writing about Athelstan, they begin to level a degree of blame in Athelstan's direction. It looks a bit like he's tried to get rid of a potential competitor, and they begin to say that perhaps Athelstan was to blame for this death. So I think that's certainly one event which is a bit murky.
But to be fair, no rule is complete without a controversy like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So David, you've got this major biography of Athelstan that you've written, but are there any other ways on top of that you think we should be looking to remember him, to mark his achievements?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think he's worthy of much more attention. Everybody, if you stop anybody on the street, they know about the date 1066. Nobody knows about the date 927, the formation of England. Why is it that we've focused on the sort of the undoing of England, if you like, in 1066 and not its formation in the first place? So I would love to see Athelstan, better commemorated in a public sense. Could be a statue somewhere. I know there are amazing frescoes in the Houses of Parliament with key scenes from history, one of which includes Alfred the Great. What is the right way to commemorate him? Maybe it's about thinking about the history curriculum in schools. That's another way in which I think he could be better known, basically. So yes, I think those are the forms that I would hope to see with Athelstan.
So David, when you're not researching and writing books, you do a lot of teaching here at Cambridge. What would you say to those who are considering, what area of history to study? How would you sell this period of history, and what do you think it requires of a student to really get to grips with it?
Well, in terms of what it requires, I would say interest. I mean, that's the number one thing that we're looking for when we're doing interviews and missions work. We want students who are going to be interested in the period. And for me, the huge selling point about doing early medieval history is the ability from day one to deal with primary texts, primary sources, looking at copies of Bede, looking at the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, reading royal diplomas, reading law codes, getting to grips for this, for yourself. That's what I did from week one of being here myself. And it's really brought the period to life. You can form your own views about these texts, what you think about what they're doing and what they're saying, and you get to discuss this with subject experts on a weekly basis. So that's what I would recommend. I think be driven by interest and look to the primary sources for the early medieval period.
And I'm always amazed. There are always these surveys of graduates coming out of university, and they're kind of like happiness ratings. And I'm always amazed that the people who are studying Anglo-Saxon always, quite a consistency, seem to be the happiest graduates there are. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, it's just a really fun, to be frank, a fun and engaging degree, which you can do. You can do it in various ways in Cambridge specifically. You can take early medieval options as part of the history tripos, the history degree system here in the history faculty, where you would mix it with any other bits of interest. You could do it with modern British history, world history, whatever it is that you want to do. Or you can dedicate yourself to the early medieval period more broadly. And there's a very wonderful department called the Anglo-Saxon, Norse and Celtic department, very close to the history faculty on the Sidgwick site, where you get the opportunity not just to do the history, but also to learn the languages. So Latin, Old English, Old Welsh, Old Norse, and so on, of the peoples of the British Isles, basically in the early medieval period. So lots of opportunities here to do it.